25. We would welcome you all here today. I know it's early in the morning and we're in veto session, but we are here and ready to hear the bill. So who would be the reviser that will give us the, Kyle, would you step up then and tell us about this bill?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I'm actually going to start off by sort of giving a 1,000-foot overview, a brief within a brief of the bill. Senate Bill 325 has a very similar structure to the APEX program, but it is not technically a continuation of that same program. The Secretary of Commerce would enter into agreements with a qualified entity, and upon meeting certain conditions, the entity could receive an investment tax credit, retention of a percentage of total payroll tax, reimbursement of a percentage of eligible employee training and education expenses, and a sales tax exemption for construction costs. APEX had additionally included reimbursements for employee relocation expenses. It incrementally lowered the corporate tax rate, and it had a specific clawback requirement if the entity relocated its facility. Senate Bill 325 and APEX both have deadlines for entering into agreements with these qualified entities. With APEX's deadline, that is falling after December 31, 2023, and Senate Bill 325's deadline falling after December 31, 2026. In Senate Bill 325, 2 or more companies could jointly enter into agreements with the Secretary to meet the requirements of the Act. And now I'm going to start actually diving into the bill section by section. New Section 1 would serve as the definition section of the Act. For the moment, I'm just going to go over one of the key definitions, and that's the definition of qualified company, which you can find on page 4 of the bill, line 30. It would mean a for-profit business establishment subject to state income, sales, or property taxes that is A, engaged in one or more of the following industries as defined by the Secretary of Commerce. 1, electric or hydrogen-powered motor vehicle manufacturing. 2, battery manufacturing. 3, research and development operation, which has its own unique definition. Or 4, headquarters for any of the industries described in clauses 1 through 3. The entity could also be engaged in any industry or revenue-producing activity if seeking benefits with respect to a qualified business facility that is the national corporate headquarters of the for-profit business establishment. The qualified company could also be a supplier of components, sub-assemblies, chemicals, or other process-related tangible goods that is located in Kansas. Notice in the APEX bill, APEX had a separate definition and benefits for qualified firms and qualified suppliers. Senate Bill 325 instead rolls suppliers into the main definition of qualified company. And then jumping to Section 2, Section 2 would establish the Act's incentive program, starting on page 3, line 23, which would be administered by the Secretary of Commerce. This section states the purpose of the program on line 25 and lists the incentives that the program may provide to a qualified company or companies, starting on page 3, line 31. To receive an incentive under the program, a qualified company or 2 or more qualified companies jointly would not only be required to meet the unique requirements of each individual incentive, but would also need to fulfill the general requirements that are listed starting on page 7 of the bill, line 6. And I'll go through those really quickly. 1, the company would have to submit an application to the Secretary. And again, 2 or more qualified companies could jointly submit an application to meet the requirements of the Act. 2, they would have to complete the project described in the application within 5 years of the date specified in the agreement to the Secretary. 3, hire a minimum of 250 new employees within 5 years. 4, retain new employees as specified in the agreement. 5, in the case of a qualified company that submits an application to construct a qualified business facility for an electric or hydrogen motor vehicle assembly operation project, make a qualified business facility investment of at least $250 million to be completed within 5 years. 6, if requested by the Secretary, they would have to submit a certificate of intent to invest. 7, if the application is approved by the Secretary, enter into a binding agreement with the Secretary. And you'll see at the very end of that paragraph 7, again, I'm on page 7, this is on line 35, it states that the Secretary shall not enter into an agreement with any qualified company after December 31, 2026. And then number 8, the last general requirement, commit to repayment of any benefit or benefits received connected to or associated with a term or condition of the agreement that has been breached as determined by the Secretary, and the forfeiture of any such earned benefits and the suspension or cessation of such future benefits for as long as the breach is not corrected. Continuing on, the Secretary of Commerce would be required to conduct an annual review of such companies' activities and certify annually to the Secretary of Revenue that the company meets criteria and is eligible for benefits. A qualified company's confidential information would not be subject to the Kansas Open Records Act, but would need to be provided to the Division of Legislative Post Audit upon request. And that's on page 8, line 16. Books and records that pertain to eligibility for benefits or compliance under the Act would be available for inspection by the Secretary upon meeting certain conditions. The Secretary of Revenue, in consultation with the Secretary of Commerce, would be required to develop a form that must be completed annually by any qualified company that receives a tax incentive under Sections 3 or 4. The Secretary of Commerce or the Secretary of Revenue could adopt rules and regulations to implement the Act. That's on page 9, line 7. Jumping into new Section 3, it would establish an investment tax credit for qualified companies. The credit could be earned each taxable year based on the amount of qualified investment, which is a defined term, made in that taxable year. And I'm on page 9, line 18. The entire amount of the credit could not be claimed in the same taxable year it is earned, but would be divided into equal portions or installments for not less than a total of 5 taxable years. That's page 9, lines 20 through 28. For eligible projects located inside of a metropolitan county, the amount of the tax credit earned in a taxable year would be up to 10%. And the term metropolitan county means the county of Douglas, Johnson, Leavenworth, Sedgwick, Shawnee, or Wyandotte. So again, the amount of the tax credit could be up to 10%. For eligible projects located outside of a metropolitan county, the amount of the tax credit earned in a taxable year would be 10% of the company's qualified investment. The qualified investment would need to be at least $250 million for a company wishing to construct a qualified business facility for an electric or hydrogen motor vehicle assembly operation project. A percentage of the credit would be refundable. You can find that on page 10, line 1. The company would need to repay all received credits if the investment is not completed by the agreed upon time. And if the company breaches the terms of the agreement and fails to reach at least 90% of the required qualified investment, the company would be liable for repaying not only the received credits, but also all other benefits received under the Act. That language is on page 10, line 21. New Section 4. would allow a qualified company to retain up to 100% of the company's Kansas payroll withholding taxes in a taxable year that the company maintains a medium wage or average wage paid to the new employees, and new employees, that is a defined term, that is equal to or greater than 120% of the county median wage, also defined, throughout the term of the agreement. The benefit would be available for up to 10 successive taxable years. If the qualified company violates the agreement and is unable to hire and retain a minimum of 90% of the number of new employees, the company would have to repay the benefit pursuant to page 11, lines 21 through 26. New Section 5 would allow a qualified company to receive reimbursement for up to 1 year of training or education expenses for training or education that is completed by each new employee that can establish residency in Kansas at the completion of such training or education and is employed at the company's qualified business facility. And that's on page 12, line 1 and 13. The maximum amount of such reimbursement paid to a qualified company would be $5 million per qualified project. Again, it's tied to the project itself. That's page 12, line 7. If the company breaches the agreement, such reimbursements would be required to be repaid. New Section 6 would establish the Transformation of Passenger and Freight Vehicle Industry Act New Employee Training and Education Fund. That's on page 12, line 43. The fund would be used to facilitate the reimbursements under New Section 5. New Sections 7 and 9 would allow qualified companies to be eligible for a sales tax exemption for all sales of tangible personal property or services purchased for the purpose of and in conjunction with constructing, reconstructing, enlarging, or remodeling a qualified business facility, and 2, the sale and installation of machinery and equipment purchased by such qualified company. If the company breaches the agreement, the company would be required to repay an amount pursuant to page 14, lines 3 through 6. And again, this change, part of, in Section 9, a statute is amended, and that makes up a very large portion of the bill's body. We have to include the entire statute, but the actual amendment is just at the very end of that particular statute. New Section 8 would require the Secretary of Commerce to transmit an annual report considering the implementation of the act to the governor and the state and the Tax and Commerce committees. Senate Bill 325 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And typically at this point, I would stand for questions, but if the chair will allow, I would hold off on taking questions until after the department has given its presentations. They're much more familiar with the whys and wherefores of this bill.
Committee, does that make sense to you then? We'll listen, or do you want to ask a question now? Senator Peck, go ahead. We'll just give you a quick opportunity here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be brief, and I had planned to ask this of you. And if you haven't looked, you just defer to the department. The difference between 325 and our current incentive programs of PEAK, HPIP, so forth, they're not significant apparently, correct? Or are they significant?
Comparing this bill with HPIP
and PEAK, for example, PEAK allows for keeping 95% of the withholding tax, if I remember correctly, and this is 100%. And if you're unfamiliar with the program enough, that's fine. We can.
Yeah, I'll defer to the department to give that comparison.
All right, thank you, Kyle. We will probably ask you some more questions after we've heard from the department. So at this point in time, we have opened the hearing on Senate Bill 325. We have one proponent, and it's Paul Hughes, Deputy Secretary for Business Development from Kansas Department of Commerce. We have lots of written proponent testimony as well, but Paul, would you like to step to the podium and give us your remarks?
Excuse me. Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair, for having me. Members of the Senate, the Kansas Department of Commerce requests that the Kansas Legislature support Senate Bill 325. Kansas long ago earned its place in the automotive industry. Now, that industry is undergoing rapid evolution with more than $245 billion in eligibility for the electric vehicle industry from the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act, and with automotive manufacturers announcing over $1.2 trillion in planned EV production investment by 2030. The United States is poised to become a global leader in the electric vehicle transition. Ford will increase its global investment into EVs to $50 billion. GM will invest $35 billion globally by 2030. Stellantis has announced it will invest $35 billion, and Tesla plans to spend $6 billion to $8 billion per year in Germany and the United States over the next 2 years. New market entrants are increasing their investments as well. Electric truck maker Rivian, Lucid Motors, and Hyundai Motor Group all will invest billions in expansion efforts through 2030. These developments create tremendous opportunity for Kansas. Long-term investment decisions by EV and hydrogen-powered vehicle manufacturers are being made in the next 12 months. This bill gives Kansas the tool it needs to protect the future of the automotive industry in Kansas and shows the world that Kansas is open for business. Specifically tailored to the electric vehicle and hydrogen-powered vehicle assembly, components, and sub-assembly manufacturers and their respective headquarters or research and development activities. Senate Bill 325 slightly enhances our traditional incentives, giving the state a competitive edge to successfully recruit this industry. The bill establishes clear eligibility requirements, including meaningful clawbacks, and requires all benefits to be earned after jobs are created and investment is made. The bill is specific to the EV and hydrogen-powered vehicle assembly, component, and subassembly manufacturers and their respective headquarters and R&D facilities, and each must meet the following qualifications to receive these benefits. At least 250 jobs within 5 years of production start. Base wages, at least 120% or more of the county median wage. A minimum capital investment of $250 million for vehicle assembly operations. This capital investment requirement does not exist for, as example, headquarter or R&D activities. And then the project must be completed within 5 years of its start date. After meeting the described qualifications, the following benefits may be earned by the business. For training, no cost access to any Kansas community college or technical college of the employer's choice for the purpose of supporting training of production workers. This reimbursement component has a $5 million cap per project. There's a payroll tax of up to incentive of up to 100% of project employee payroll withholding retained by the employer for up to 10 years. This is similar to our current PEAK program benefit, and currently with PEAK, businesses are eligible for 95% of the project employment payroll withholding tax. There's a capital investment tax credit of up to 10% of total project capital investment and a refundable tax credit that is paid over at least 5 years or more. This is a significant reduction in the capital investment tax included in Apex, which was up to 15%. There's a sales tax exemption, an abatement of the construction materials tax on the construction, renovation, or expansion of a qualifying project for the specific purpose of this industry. The sales tax exemption is commonly used as part of our HBIP program. After entering into an agreement, the following clawbacks will be implemented in these scenarios. If a company fails to reach at least 90% of the committed capital investment of project completion, or if the project is abandoned before the incentive agreement expires, all earned benefits of this program shall be revoked and reimbursed to the state. If employment drops below 90% of the committed jobs at any point after project completion, but not to exceed 15 years from that date, the payroll tax and sales tax exemption benefits shall be clawed back proportionately. In short, this bill creates a new economic development tool for job creation activity, capital investments made by the manufacturers, and training partnerships with our community colleges. Overall, this tool will allow the state to continue to capture future investments of the automotive industry and build off the established momentum that has been earned by our bipartisan efforts to make Kansas the best place in the country to do business. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. My sincerest apologies for being late, and thanks to my vice chair for getting this meeting started. Questions? Senator Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It sounds like this is just a golden opportunity with a limited time window, correct?
Senator Ware, Madam Chair, that's exactly the case here. There's a profound shift taking place in the automotive industry right now. Virtually every major brand has pledged to be 100% electric passenger vehicles by 2035. And all of those decisions are happening right now because the federal incentives have a shot clock on them. They have 2 years to get those projects initiated, so all the decisions are happening now.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So if that short window, if there's a new administration in D.C. that eliminates these incentives, then what? Is the electric vehicle hydrogen going to continue to flourish, or is it going to really stand down? And I know I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, but I'm just curious, if we implement something like 325 and then the federal money goes away, what happens if these companies, I guess what I'm getting.
Are you asking for my opinion on the matter, Senator?
Well, not necessarily. I'm wondering if there are clawbacks in here. If the companies they enter into an agreement with the Secretary, they don't meet these requirements. How are we going to get the money back? How are we going to claw it back if the companies just go away?
Senator Peck and Madam Chair, that's the case with any company that becomes insolvent and vanishes. Most of the companies that are in this industry are the established names, Ford, GM, and the like, with longstanding reputation here in the state. If the companies become insolvent, then there isn't a mechanism other than through the courts to recover those funds.
Okay, Madam Chairman, I've got several questions. I don't want to take the committee's time, and if there are other questions, I can stand down, but I will just follow your lead on. I did ask a question of Revisor before you arrived that I would like for the department to answer.
Feel free to ask that, and then we do have other senators, and Senator, we will come back. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask their questions, but go ahead and ask your question of the Revisor to the Deputy Secretary.
I will circle back around to that because you indicate in your testimony that Senate Bill 325 slightly enhances. So my question would be how slightly? For example, peak is 95% withholding, and this is 100%. Is peak 10 years? HPIP, there are several programs, incentive programs we already have. I guess I'm wondering why we need this, because we're not looking at a billion-dollar investment from a company like we were with Apex, which I'm still not really a fan of, but we're only looking at $250 million, and we've got other businesses, entities that are investing significantly more than $250 million, and they're not getting any additional incentives such as what we're looking at here.
Senator Peck and Madam Chair, to answer that question, what's probably the two significant differences in SB 325 as compared to our existing programs is the form of the tax incentive under the HPIP program, being a refundable incentive as opposed to a credit. When these large investments are being made, the issue is the company carrying a net operating loss for several years as brand new equipment is being depreciated. So it's the form of the incentive that's changing. The second is in the training, the approach to training. You'll notice in there that in the training element, there's one of the contingencies is that anybody that's outside of the state of Kansas must establish Kansas residency to be qualified for that. And it's part of a multi-pronged approach to bring more people to Kansas and in the approach to training, working with the community colleges who have established programs that can deliver a workforce within a 2-year period of time.
So the question that I ask about the difference between peak 95% versus this at 100%, is peak 10 years or is peak just for
Depending on the,
Down, let others ask questions.
Senator Peck and Madam Chair, depending on the qualifications of the program, yes, it can be up to a 10-year period of time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator O'Shea, then Senator Tyson.
Madam Chair, you spoke about how this is a unique time window for bringing this industry in. Can you tell me a little bit about the climate around making sure these businesses that are expanding really rapidly are in the U.S. versus in other countries?
Senator O'Shea, Madam Chair, there's a national effort in that regard to making sure that this production is done domestically. And it crosses actually several industries, but automotive is one of them. And the benefit that we have in Kansas within the automotive industry is access to automotive suppliers in Canada and Mexico, and being at the crossroads from national infrastructure in the form of rail and highways. So there's a significant effort afoot to make sure that this production is being done domestically.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. I have deja vu. I think it's Apex on another version of Apex, and I'm curious as to why you limited the refundability to 5 years in this one, and it was not limited in Apex. Did you learn a lesson from that, or what are your reasonings? Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have several questions like Senator Peck, but I'll wait for the others, Madam Chairman.
Senator Tyson and Madam Chair, in the layout of Senate Bill 325, the goal here was to allow a longer time frame if it were needed. In our dialogue with Office of Budget, what we were looking at was essentially cash flow for the state and allowing the secretary time to make the deal, the structure of the deal longer if necessary in order to make it more feasible for the state.
Other questions from other committee? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thank you for being here today. Just a couple questions and a comment. As far as this particular act, is there an expiration date on it, a sunset? Is it in perpetuity? How long does it roll?
Senator Holland, Madam Chair, this Senate Bill 325 proposes a sunset date of December 31st, 2026.
Okay. And are there, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, another question. And would there be, is there any sort of limitation on the number of bites of the apple participants that could participate, or is basically anybody who qualifies between now and the sunset, if they meet past the bar, they can receive the benefits?
Senator Holland, Madam Chair, there isn't a prescribed limit on the number of deals that can be worked through this program. It's what makes it similar to HPIP and PEAK. Those programs also do not have a limit on the number of deals that can be that have access to those programs. It's important to understand, however, that this is the highly competitive landscape. I wish we could win every deal that we touched. The reality is it's closer to about 1 in 5 is our current success rate on any new project. So it's the competitive forces of the market will help reduce the number of times that we access the program.
Senator Holland, final question, then we'll circle.
Yeah, just a very brief comment. First of all, just a couple observations. When I was going through the bill last night, I was pleasantly surprised to see basically tried and true tools from the traditional Department of Commerce toolkit that were used to do this. In the Apex, I was not a fan of what I perceived as a subsidization, of wages or salaries. Whereas this, you're just really allowing the company to keep the withholdings like we have in PEAK. I think that's a much smarter approach, and it's not creating a level playing field for employers hiring. So I do want to laud you guys on that. The other thing I would say is, and this is why I feel pretty good about this, is because the tools in here we've seen before. We know they have a proven track record. The other thing I like about this is I'm glad you're doing this. You know, we just got the Panasonic plant in there in Northeast. We are smack dab in the center of the country. We've got rail coming in and out north, south, east, west. I think it's imperative that we have something like this in place because I think we got to strike while the iron's hot, and I appreciate the department's foresight to get this out there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for being here. I have two questions. One, Senator O'Shea mentioned foreign investment, and you said it has to be produced here, but the company doesn't have to be, it can be a foreign, it could be South Korean.
Senator Schallenberger, Madam Chair, the restrictions that we follow on ownership of the company follows that of the Treasury Department's specially designated nationals list. So we do.
That's a yes. Could be.
It could be and often is a joint venture that's done.
And the second thing is, and I'm not familiar, I've not been on the Commerce Committee before, and with all the peaks and valleys. On the border, if you live on the border, I mean, we have a lot of people that work in Kansas that live in Missouri, so a employer can get the benefit of not paying payroll tax on a Missouri employee, is that correct?
Senator Schallenberger, Madam Chair, I believe there's a compact between the state of Missouri and Kansas specific to the Kansas City market as it relates to collecting income taxes and remitting them to each state.
So, explain that to me. So an employer in Kansas takes advantage of this bill and hires a Missouri resident and doesn't have to pay the withholding tax, or gets a rebate, or gets a credit.
Senator Schallenberger, I would be more comfortable if revenue were to respond directly to that. My understanding of it is that those taxes are still collected, and that compact manages how each state does that, how a Kansas person employed in Missouri would be treated, and how a Missouri person employed in Kansas would be treated.
I'd be curious to figure out how it worked. Thank you.
Can we get information on that from research, please? Thank you. We are going to go we'll go back to Senator Peck for follow-up and Senator Tyson as well. I understand they have additional questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to stick with what Senator Schallenberger just brought up on the payroll tax. So I'm just going to say they're Kansas residents, so we're not dealing with multi-states for simplicity. The business withholds the employee's taxes and keeps them. And then the employee files an income tax return with the state, and they qualify for a refund. So the state is not only giving up, not collecting the taxes, but they're using other taxpayers' money to give back to the taxpayer who worked for this business. Is that scenario a possibility?
Senator Peck, as I understand it, the refund would only occur if the employee overpaid their taxes.
Correct, like any other.
So it would be a return of their own tax dollar.
But the business never remitted those to the state, correct? Because they are eligible to keep 100% of the withholdings.
Correct.
Okay. So there was no money that went to the state from that employee, but yet that employee's, on paper, overpaid their taxes, so they get a refund from the state.
That's correct.
Okay, so the state's actually giving more money. If the refundable language was removed, the refundable tax credit, and it was just a carry forward, would that be, in the department's mind, a significant change or an unacceptable change?
Senator Peck, Madam Chair, the intent on the employee payroll side was to mimic the existing program of PEAK, which is how PEAK is handled today. So to design that as some form of carryover would mean an overhaul of what that program is.
We're not looking to change PEAK, I don't believe. We're looking just to, I'm sorry, we're not looking to change Apex, but you said PEAK. I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, sometimes having trouble keeping track of the acronyms that we use here. I guess some of my discomfort, Madam Chairman, is they're down in the Senate District 15, we've got a business currently investing $425 million. And the incentive, Montgomery County incentive business entity said that they did not come to the state with their hand out asking for a dime. They just used our existing programs. I'm curious as to why we're kind of looking at something to this effect. It looks like there are, and also looking through the bill, it looks like there are many, many instances where we throw everything in the lap of the secretary. And I'm not to disparage any particular secretary, but I'm uncomfortable with giving any one person in the state of Kansas all this authority or latitude. And then there was one on page 9 in section, I don't know what section it is, but it says the Secretary of Commerce or the Secretary of Revenue may adopt rules and regulations. This is in section 2. I'm curious if the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Revenue disagree with the rules and regulations. Who trumps who when we say one or the other can? Do you know, is it the Secretary of Commerce?
Senator Peck, Madam Chair, in that instance, if it's determined that the state cannot bank a certain sort of incentive structure, I think the expectation is that at the end of the day, it's Office of Budget that has final say.
Okay, Madam Chairman, I won't continue asking questions, but I just have a lot of questions, discomfort. And I guess some of it goes to the investment, the heavy investment in Senate District 15 currently that's going on, plus the fact that I'm still have not healed from my discomfort with Apex and the amount of money we're giving away, because this is not just letting a business keep their money, it's refundable tax credits, which means we're taking money from other businesses and giving to them. So I'll see if there are other questions from the senator from Lynn or others on the committee, but I appreciate your indulgence, Madam Chairman.
Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't see anything in the legislation that actually restricts the employee. The new positions can be created anywhere, telecommuting with everything else going on these days. And I don't know, it just appears to me, this bill, and I guess I'd like to hear the department's comment on this. To me, it appears like if you are an existing Kansas business, then you're not on Commerce's radar. We are only trying to entice new businesses and use taxpayer money to entice those businesses instead of a tax cut that would help all Kansans. Senate Bill 169, for example.
Senator Tyson, Madam Chair, thank you for the input. The purpose of Senate Bill 325 is actually the opposite of that. The intent is to protect the automotive industry that's already here. The automotive industry, when it goes through a transformative change, everything is, particularly in the engine components and everything around, as an example, but not for the GM facility in Fairfax. It's an internal combustion engine. The transmissions are different, the engines are different, the way they're assembled is different, the braking systems are different, everything is different. Those suppliers are here. And if that industry transitions into the EV space and we don't assist those companies in making that transition, we are at risk of losing the companies that are already here. So this bill is designed in a way that it benefits the companies that are already here and attracts new companies to the state.
If I may, Madam Chairman, he said if, that's a big if, and that's a gamble. And I think your opinion of what government is to be and what I see government as are completely opposite. Government should get out of the way so these companies can perform, not provide incentive packages to pick winners and losers. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
And Senator Dahl, we'll get to you in just a moment. I do have a follow-up on Senator Tyson's question because the timing of this has seemed a little bit in light of all of the governor's vetoes. And the secretary has a unique role as being both lieutenant governor and secretary of commerce. And it strikes me as a little bit interesting that the governor vetoed SB 169, tax cuts and relief for Kansans, under the explanation that we can't afford it. So if we cannot afford that, can you comment on how we can afford this incentive package?
Madam Chair, I'm unfamiliar with any financial notes or anything regarding the other bill. I apologize. I'm just not familiar with it.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. This question's a little bit off, but being a former city commissioner and such, when we have a family move into a community, I'm hoping you'll know the statistic, how much is it worth to that community, for that family to move in, for each family that lives there? There's a formula that X amount of dollars for that community, for new people that live there?
Senator Dole, Madam Chair, what we would be looking at in that instance is the household income. What is the household
Exactly what we're
income?
looking
So we're in the program requirements that they're to qualify. A part of that is that the base wages under this program are being paid at 120% or more of the county median. So without assigning a dollar value to it, the jobs created under this program would improve the value of the community because the household income would be higher than the rest of the county.
I think I saw one place where it was like worth $25,000 for every household is there. Another thing, like in Apex and such, the Panasonic plant and such, how much product do they buy from from local businesses versus, they don't bring in everything like a Menards or whatever brings in everything. So the community, if they have a hardware store or a Menards or a Home Depot, how much would they benefit from something like this?
Senator Dole, Madam Chair, for projects of this size, a lot of the work that's done is through local labor, and that's the restaurant industry, it's the hospitality industry, everything else around. Panasonic is living up to its promises, working with local steel workers and sourcing local steel. So there's a significant benefit really to a region and a significant region. I believe the steel contractor is out of St. Louis. And so we see a large reach in these projects, drawing talent and opportunity to the state.
Any other questions from committee members? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I apologize. I will be brief. I don't want to leave the impression that I don't believe in bringing business in or creating jobs. It's always a good thing for a community, and you did a good job of explaining that, Senator Dahl's question. It's just, where should we as a state legislature start doling out, or how big of incentives are we going to give to certain industries that we don't give to other industries? We talk about trying to keep an entity in Kansas. It's already here. The soybean crushing plant down in southeast Kansas is already here. They're building a whole new facility for $425 million, which really exceeds 500 or 250 million. So I guess my point on that is I don't understand why we have such legislation as this, whereas we've already got so many incentives in place. Is it strictly because of the department's belief that, as you indicated at the very beginning, this is a one-time shot, a brief window, that if we don't really compete, we're going to be left out in the cold?
Senator Peck, Madam Chair, it's to circle back on an original question that you asked, Senator Peck, on the difference between this program and the others. It's really the form of the incentive, not so much the amount. And when we look at PEAK and we look at the HPIP programs, particularly HPIP, because that's the construction of the facility, the equipment that goes in it, and everything else. It's the equipment and the facility the equipment in the facility that's being written down to such a degree in its early years that the incentives we're offering in the form of a credit don't have value to those projects until 5 to 7 years into the future. It's something where there's a limited attractiveness to it, I'll say. So in this, the change that's happening is really primarily to the form of the incentives rather than the amount of the incentives.
Okay, I do have just a couple of quick questions, Mr. Deputy Secretary. So is there any oversight? You can't help but compare this package to Apex. And earlier in the session, there was an effort to revise Apex. It didn't gain traction, and this seems to be an offshoot of that. And one of the things as I look and compare is there appears to be no oversight from the State Finance Council or input in this package, unlike Apex. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, this was designed in a manner where the Secretary is currently overseeing the HPIP program, our training program, and the PEAK program without a State Finance Council process attached to it. And so this was designed in a similar manner where the Secretary would have discretion over the program.
Thank you for that. And it's not going to come as any surprise to you or Ms. Willis, who's in the audience today. One of my big concerns with Apex, and that I fought very hard for, was if we're going to give incentives, to Senator Peck's point, to draw in businesses, why don't we share the benefit of that with all companies across the board, hence the 0.5% reduction in corporate income tax for every Apex project. There's no provision to share the wealth, so to speak, in this package of incentives. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, again, this program was designed more so to mimic PEAK and HPIP, which don't have that corporate tax reduction element to it. There are some pretty significant differences between this and Apex in total dollar value of the program and its reach. This also doesn't have a relocation benefit to it. There are some significant differences between Apex, which admittedly was a large commitment made by the state that should benefit all. And under these other programs, this is the performance of the company and entering into an agreement with the state.
Any other questions? Seeing none, committee, I will thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary, for being here in your testimony. I want to draw your attention to proponent written only. I will let you know that due to this being a very quick hearing, we have received additional written only testimony, and that is not listed on your sheet, but it has been uploaded. So please take a look at that. And there was one mistake in a name. Greg Smith from Wyandotte, that's Greg Kendall from Wyandotte. So note those changes. With that, I will close the hearing, and I want to thank you all for coming in so early. We know it's that time of year. Appreciate your flexibility in coming in so early, staff. Thank you. With that, we are adjourned.